Welcome students, this is my loving literature video on the Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. As you can see, we have our highlighter and our pencil, our tabs, and our dictionary ready to read. So we're going to start with, chapter 1 in this book is called The Custom House. This is a chapter that is just kind of setting the purpose that the narrator of this story is talking about how they came across an item as they were working in a place called a custom house. And they came across this item in some papers and discovered a story behind these things. And the narrator, the author is Nathaniel Hawthorne. The narrator sounds like it's Nathaniel Hawthorne, but we're just calling him a narrator. He is trying to basically just explain the purpose of writing this novel, writing this story about this particular protagonist. And so I am not going to read the Custom House chapter to you. It's just kind of setting things up for the novel. It is a little bit challenging. I will tell you that Nathaniel Hawthorne is a very high vocabulary, lengthy sentences type of writer. He's extremely well versed and has challenging vocabulary in here. So we're going to go to where the story actually begins, which is, as you can see, past the Custom House chapters here. It's called The Prison Door, and it's an extremely short chapter. So we'll be able to read this along with chapter 2. But I just wanted to introduce this novel to you. Before you ever read a novel, the first thing you should do is try to understand the title and what is meant by a scarlet letter. The word scarlet obviously is another word meaning red, the color red. And we see on the cover of this book, we see an A. So the novel is going to have something to do with this. Now, I would like to point out that anytime you're looking for symbols, one of the best places to first discover a symbol is on the cover of the novel. The title will often give you an idea of a symbol, and if you see any pictures on the cover, they are often giving you an idea of a symbol. So I would mark in my notes right off the bat that looks like the letter A, particularly a red letter A, is going to end up being a symbol in this book. A symbol is any object, color, phrase that seems to be repeated throughout the entire novel. It's repeated. It's something that comes up quite frequently, or at least several times within the novel. Almost always when you see something like that, you know it's got to be a symbol. And if it's a symbol, it's almost always related to the theme of the novel. So if you have to discover the theme, you want to think about what your symbols mean. Okay, so I'm going to start with chapter 1. And I'm going to read and kind of discuss with you ways to take notes and to help you understand the book. So the title of the chapter is very important. If there is a chapter title, they usually suggest the setting or the main idea of the chapter. So obviously we're talking about a prison door in this chapter. Now, it's also important to know when this book was written, okay? Or not only when it was written, but we have to discover the setting of the story, because this book may have been written let's say it was written in the 1900s, but it might be a story about something that happened in the 1500s. And obviously the days, the times, the people, the clothing, the environment, everything was different. Even the language was different. Even if it was English, it was, spoken a little bit differently. So this book was written in let's see, I'm sorry, I forgot where it was on here. It was written in the 1800s, but the story is of our protagonist, and she's living in early New England, so the early Americas, specifically the town of Boston. And she's living at a time when America was newly discovered, colonies were built and started, and so it's very early on in our American history. This is not technically historical fiction, although some of the things that happen in this book are connected to things that happened in history, real life things that happened. So this book will be, the setting is about 1604. So always know when the story is taking place. That'll help you understand. If you know anything about history, it'll help you understand a little bit more about it. So I'm just going to start reading, and I already have some things highlighted and some notes, so we'll take a look at those. Pay attention to how long the sentences are in this book, okay? And how you have to read these long sentences and not get lost. A throng of bearded men in sad-colored garments and gray, steepled, crowned hats, intermixed with women, some wearing hoods and others bareheaded, was assembled in front of a wooden edifice, the door of which was heavily timbered with oak and studded with iron spikes. As you can see, one long sentence, right? So always try to just identify your subject and your predicate. The subject is the who or the what, and the predicate is what they're doing. So this says a throng of bearded men. So the bearded men is our subject, and then we don't find out what they're doing until we get down to here. Was assembled. So the bearded men, a throng of bearded men, I should have included a throng of bearded men was assembled. So it helps you to find the subject and the predicate of every sentence so you don't get lost on what's being said. And this author is very, very good at putting a lot of descriptive information in between the subject and the predicate. So it's easy to get lost, okay? So basically, these bearded men are wearing some very kind of depressing, sad clothes, and their hats are being described, and they are mixed in a crowd with women, and the women are wearing hoods, and some of them are wearing no kind of hood at all. They are bareheaded, so that no hat or no hood. And then it tells where they are assembled or gathered. So they're assembled in front of a wooden edifice. Again, if you don't know a vocabulary word, why don't you circle it? Make a little note here to look it up, okay? So you're going to look up edifice if you don't know what it is. But you can also try to use context clues. Whatever this thing is, it's wooden. Okay, so some sort of structure. So again, make sure you have your dictionary nearby so you can look up your words. So basically an edifice is the front or the face of a building, some sort of structure or building. And then it's talking about the door of that building, the door of which was heavily timbered with oak and studded with iron spikes. Not the type of door we would see today. So obviously this is not a time frame in history that was recent. This would be something probably a little more in the past. And as we know, I believe the setting we'll find out later is 1604, the time. Okay, the founders of a new colony whatever utopia of human virtue and happiness they might originally project, have invariably recognized it among their earliest practical necessities to allot a portion of the virgin soil as a cemetery, and another portion as the site of a prison. Okay, so I'm just circling things that I'm noticing here, but again, long sentence, find your subject and predicate. The founders, what did they do? They have recognized, that it is necessary, so among their earliest practical necessities, to do what? To allot a portion of the virgin soil. Soil is the ground, right? As a cemetery, a burial place. And another portion is the site of a prison. So these are talking about the founders of this colony, where this throng of bearded men and this crowd of men and women live. And when they found this colony, the very first thing they did was have a spot already planned out for a cemetery. What's a cemetery for? To bury people who die. And they also decided they needed a spot for a prison. It's like, instead of building a grocery store first, or a bank like we would do today, or a gas station like we would do today, they started their town with a cemetery and a prison. This says something about the kind of people they were and what they believed about life. Okay, so that's important. They believe that we all die, we're all going to die, so we need a place to be buried. But what does it say about the prison? Why did they build a prison? Why would anyone build a prison? To put the bad guys, right? So they believe that people or humans can do things that are wrong, or, as you will discover in this book, the word sin. Sin means to do things that are wrong against other people, but also against God. And so they believed that they needed a prison to place those bad people, people who have sinned. In accordance with this rule, it may safely be assumed that the forefathers of Boston, so here's the first time we hear where we are. So we're in Boston. So I always write the setting of each chapter. I write it at the beginning of the chapter when I find out what it is. Setting includes place and also time. So we want to know both, okay? If you are not allowed to write in your book because you're borrowing it from a library or your teacher gave it to you to give back, get some of these sticky notes, okay? Put 1604, put Boston, use the sticky notes. That's another option. I like to write in my books because I own them. Okay, so the forefathers of Boston had built the first prison house somewhere in the vicinity of Cornhill almost as seasonably as they marked out the first burial ground on Isaac Johnson's lot and round about his grave, which subsequently became the nucleus of all the congregated sepulchres in the old churchyard of King's Chapel. Long sentence, big words, right? Look up words you don't know. A sepulcher is like a grave site, usually a standing one with a stone built up. And what else? A nucleus. You should know this from science, okay? The nucleus of the cell is the center, right? The center, or the part of the cell where everything stems from. It's the brain of the cell, right? So they're using a metaphor here, the word nucleus, even though back then they didn't know specifically what a nucleus was. But the author's using this word to suggest that this area where the prison and the cemetery are becomes kind of the center of town. That's where everybody gathers around. So that's kind of interesting. Certain it is that. Okay, this is something you're going to see in older fiction, especially in Shakespeare, when you start reading Shakespeare. The authors will rearrange the syntax. The syntax is the word order. Okay? Authors would like to rearrange the word order to an order that we wouldn't normally say. If I was going to say this to you, I wouldn't say, certain it is that. I would say, it is certain that some 15 or 20 years after the settlement of the town, the wooden jail was already marked with weather stains and other indications of age, which gave a yet darker aspect to its beetle-browed and gloomy front. Okay, so see what I'm talking about, word order. And this is something very common in classic novels, in Shakespeare, in older literature. This is how they wrote. So don't get confused. Just think, how would I normally say that? I wouldn't say certain it is that. I would say it is certain that some, and then go on. Okay? That's just something to help you with the word order. Again, looking for subjects and predicate is important, and watching out for the word order that gets moved around, okay? Also, we want to notice the tone. I wrote the word tone right here. Tone means the author's attitude about what they're saying, or even the narrator's attitude. Okay, the narrator's attitude about how they're saying what they're saying. If you're mad and you're upset about something, you're going to say things in a certain way. If you're happy, you're going to say things in a certain way. And so you want to notice the attitude or the tone. There's some words here, some diction here: beetle-browed, gloomy, darker aspect, indications of age. All of these are making this place that's being described as very, just very somber, and morose is a good word, and very, dark and gloomy. So pay attention to that. The rust on the ponderous ironwork of its oaken door looked more antique than anything else in the New World. Like all that pertains to crime, it seemed never to have known a youthful era. Before this ugly edifice, and between it and the wheel track of the street, was a grass plot, much overgrown with burdock, pigweed, apple purru, and such unsightly vegetation, which evidently found something congenial in the soil that had so early borne the black flower of civilized society, a prison. Okay. Congenial would be a word you should look up. Kind of just means friendly. So it's saying that these plants, even though they're kind of unsightly, they found something pleasant or friendly in this soil, which contained also the spot for the prison. A dark place, a sad place to have to put into your town. But yet there's things growing around it. Even though these things aren't that pretty, they seem to find comfortable soil to live in. Excuse me. Here we have the word but. We know there's a contrast now. So they're talking about these ugly plants, but on one side of the portal, a portal is a doorway or door, and rooted almost at the threshold was a wild rose bush, covered in this month of June with its delicate gems, which might be imagined to offer their fragrance and fragile beauty to the prisoner as he went in, and to the condemned criminal as he came forth to his doom. in token that the deep heart of nature could pity and be kind to him. Notice nature is capitalized right here. Whenever you see a word capitalized that isn't normally capitalized, it's probably being personified. Personification. Okay, so nature is, nature. Nature is the ground and the grass and the plants and the trees and the animals. And they are not human. Nature is not human, but here it's being personified, which means it's kind of treating it as human. It's giving nature the ability to pity or feel sorry for and be kind, right? And be kind to the person who's being condemned or the person who's in the prison. Okay, so nature can't feel sorry for anything in real life, and nature cannot be kind to someone. Those are human qualities. And so when the author assigns human qualities to a non-human thing, that is called personification. And the way that we know that's happening is we've got a capital N here, so that's a signal. This rosebush, by a strange chance, has been kept alive in history, but whether it had merely survived out of the stern old wilderness so long after the fall of the gigantic pines and oaks that originally overshadowed it, or whether, as there is fair authority for believing, it had sprung up under the footsteps of the sainted Anne Hutchinson as she entered the prison door, we shall not take upon us to determine. Okay, so basically saying, not really sure how the rosebush got there in such a strange place, right next to a prison door, and it's the only pretty thing out there. There is authority. There are people that have authority that believe that it kind of grew under the footsteps of the sainted Anne Hutchinson as she entered the prison door. So somebody named Anne Hutchinson, who had at one time been in that prison, and they're calling her sainted, which means a godly person. So why would a godly person be sent to prison, right? Something to think about. But it says, we shall not take upon us to determine, us being the narrator and the reader. Okay, so you and the narrator, we don't have to determine that. We don't have to figure out how the rosebush got there. The narrator is giving a couple suggestions on how it got there, but we don't have to figure it out. Finding it so directly on the threshold of our narrative, which is now about to issue from that inauspicious portal, we could hardly do otherwise than pluck one of its flowers and present it to the reader. It may serve, let us hope, we see the word symbolize here. Boy, you better mark that. It may serve to, let us hope, to symbolize some sweet moral blossom that may be found along the track, or relieve the darkening close of a tale of human frailty and sorrow. So already the narrator is giving us a suggestion of a symbol, that the rose bush is a symbol, and it might symbolize this, okay? Some sweet moral blossom that may be found along the track, or relieve the darkening close of a tale of human frailty and sorrow. Definitely mark this in chapter 1. That is very important to the message, the theme that this novel is going to end up discussing. It's also a symbol of the protagonist that this novel is about, and we will identify that person next. You can watch the next video for chapter 2.